Khira Rotty is a native of Memphis and is a blessed wife and mother. She strives to bring the beauty of the theology of the body first and foremost to her family as a stay-at-home mom, and then to all those whom God puts in her path, and today God is putting you in her path. Khira will share with us her faith journey and her love for our holy Catholic Church. Please join me in welcoming Khira Rotty.
Thank you. Oh, wow. There's a lot of you. Oh, this is beautiful. This is absolutely beautiful. I'm so blessed to be able to be here with you today. I am a native Memphian, but my family moved from Collierville to Greensboro, North Carolina in 2014. One of my favorite things to do in North Carolina was to go to the mountains. We're only about 2.5 hours away from the mountains. And so I would love to take the family there and to really go and see God's beauty just manifested in nature at the top of the mountains. So the mountains were always calling me. And so it's no surprise that in 2016, January of 2016, I was scrolling through Facebook. You guys know what that's like. And something popped up, and it was this 10-mile hike in the mountains near where we lived, and you reach 5 peaks. And I was like, this is amazing. This would be awesome. Now, I also noticed on Facebook, a lot of people were doing half marathons, 5Ks, marathons, and I'm like, that's great, but I don't like running for long distances. But 10-mile hike on mountains, that I thought I could do. And so I called a friend of mine, and when I called this friend of mine, I asked her if she'd like to go with me. She was in North Carolina, and she did agree to go. So we were super excited. So we were going to, that hike was going to be in September, and so we decided, okay, in this time, we're going to spend some time training for 10 miles, researching what you take on a 10-mile hike, and so we were going to do that time, but God had other plans, though. In February of that year, so the next month after I said we're going to do this, my husband received a phone call from Father David Graham offering my husband a job here at St. Mary's in Jackson, Tennessee. And we were like, okay, really, Lord? All right. And so after months of discernment, we did see that this was God's will for us. So in July of 2016, we did move to Jackson, Tennessee. Now, that friend that I was going to go on that hike with, she and I used to go have coffee together every week on a Wednesday. We were going to move on a Thursday, so my friend and I gathered for our last coffee, and I told her, you know, I don't think I can come back for this hike because I think I might be pregnant. And she was like, really? And she was like, might? Do you know this? And I said, no, I don't know it. She's like, girl, we're getting in a car. We're going to CVS. So we did. Went, bought a pregnancy test at a CVS. She rushed me into the bathroom. So I found out there at the CVS that I was, in fact, pregnant. So what was going to be a very difficult departure became a joy-filled moment between the two of us. Now, we did move to Jackson, but unfortunately, a few weeks after we moved to Jackson, I went to my OBGYN, I had an ultrasound, and they told me that I was going to miscarry this child. That was my first one. So my heart broke over this. I had not experienced that before. And so I was in the doctor's office by myself, in silence, and I'm going on a hike. I'm going on a hike. I'm going on a hike. Sprang up from my heart. And so I was confused because I was like, Lord, I just said goodbye to all these friends, and this is tough, and I'm in this new community. But no, I'm going on a hike. Came to mind. So that was August. That hike was going to be a month away. I was in no physical shape to do a 10-mile hike. I called that friend and I asked her, would you like to go on the hike? She said, yep, we're going to do this. So we, in fact, did go on that hike. And so there I was in September, going without any training on a 10-mile hike, but I needed an adventure with God in the midst of chaos, confusion, and pain. I needed to go back and to see his beauty and for it to be manifested. It sounded crazy to do this, but it was totally worth it. I learned so many valuable lessons, so that's what I'm going to do with you and the rest of this time, is to show you the 4 lessons that I gained in that one hike, and lessons that first manifested themselves to me while I was hiking, and then as I've reflected on them, ways in which God has manifested those lessons to me throughout my life. So, here we go. Lesson number 1. Even when you are not prepared, God will provide. So, my friend and I were not prepared for 10 miles in the mountains. We were not prepared. But we had our cute outfits on. Our hair looked good. We had Starbucks in our hand. I thought I was prepared. I had a backpack. It had a first aid kit, so that was great. Extra pair of shoes, and 1 water bottle. It was a Camelback, but it was 1 Camelback water bottle. That wasn't going to get us far. So 10 miles, 5 peaks, here we come. Needless to say, by the time, and that was us at the beginning. Needless to say, by the time we got to mile 3 and peak 1, the hair was not cute. We were cursing Starbucks. And we were nearly out of water. So that was me right there up at the top right by that time. I didn't think we could make it. Reality had hit hard. We kept going, but by peak 2, we were both out of water. Peak 3, despair hit. We were getting dehydrated. We were at mile marker 5. We were halfway through peak 3, and we were thinking, we're going to turn back around and just give up. We just give up. But we still have 5 miles if we wanted to give up. So it was either give up or just go the next 5 miles and just hope and pray. So we hoped, we prayed, and some other people heard us and were like, really? You don't have water? There were no stations. So they gave us an apple. That apple was the most glorious apple. We praised God. That 1 small, tiny apple got us to the next peak. It was amazing. God gave us food for the journey. So how is this related to my life? There have been times in my life where the sacraments have been the food on this journey of life, sustaining me to go from one peak to the next, one day to the next, one moment to the next. On one particular occasion, I distinctly remember where God gave this to me in the sacraments. My husband and I had just been married. In February of 2006, we were excited and we totally thought we were prepared and ready for this journey of marriage. I had this perfect vision of how marriage would look and finances and all of that, and all of you married people are chuckling. So when it didn't look like that picture of perfection, I started to kind of panic. Stress started to overwhelm me. My husband was a youth minister here at Incarnation at that time, and we took the teens on the Steubenville Youth Conference. While at the conference, I went to confession. And I was going to confession, confessing the same frustrating things over and over and over again. The stress of finances, all of that stuff. And then finally, the priest just looked at me very kindly, and he said, "You don't trust Jesus." I wept. That was a pierce to my heart. He was true. I had been wondering, why do I keep doing these same things? You don't trust Jesus. So while I didn't struggle going to Mass, I didn't struggle with the teachings of the church, allowing God to come in and take over my life, I had not done that. And so my penance was, pray, Jesus, I trust in you, for 5 minutes at adoration. I was like, sweet, that's an easy one. Okay. So I walk out of there, and I went to, this conference was held at a theater, and my group was up on the mezzanine level. So I went up to my husband after confession, and I was like, okay, where do you want me to be? So he said, I want you to sit at the aisle at the end. Well, I'm an extrovert, he's the introvert, and I was like, no, I don't want to be at the aisle. I want to be in the middle of the people during this adoration and praise and worship and all of that. So frustration, again, what I had just confessed, starts welling up. Jesus, I trust in you. Okay, all right. Jesus, I trusted you. I'm going to the aisle. So I went to the aisle. Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus, I trust in you. Adoration began. And something different happened at this conference. While at this conference, we were praying before the Blessed Sacrament. And then all of a sudden, the priest grabbed the monstrance and started to process the monstrance around the theater. Now, like I said, we were on the mezzanine. So at one point, the priest and the Blessed Sacrament went out of my vision. I didn't know where they had gone. And then all of a sudden, a spotlight hit my face, and I heard a door open next to me. And I turned around, and there was Jesus. He got to me, the priest walked up to me, and he stopped right in front of me. Tears were everywhere. Y'all, it was the ugly cry. Snot was everywhere. It was just all coming out. But I was the woman at the well, and Jesus had to come see me. And he did. And he let me know that if I stop trying to control life and I just trust in him, then he will come running to me in miraculous ways to provide all I need. This was one story out of many where he has provided that nourishment that I need on this journey of life. Now, lesson number 2, just take one step at a time. One more step. So on the hike, my friend and I, we got to a certain point where dehydration, fatigue, hills, heat, it was just all wearing us down. And the only thing we could say was just one more step, one more step, one more step. And that's all we could muster up was one more step. If we thought about the numerous steps ahead of us, anxiety would have taken over. And so this is what Jesus tells us when he says, do not be anxious. We oftentimes get way too ahead of ourselves. And we dwell on all the possible horrible things that could happen in life. And we live in a culture where media thrives on fear, and we, being women, can let that dictate our lives because we are spiritually connected to the people around us. So when we moved to from Collierville to North Carolina, that was kind of the one step that I never thought I could take. It seemed like the impossible one. I was born and raised here. I've been here since 1985. And so I lived about 5 minutes away from my parents, 5 minutes away from my sister and her family. And so that was going to be the painful step to take. And then when we got to North Carolina, and that step was taken all in trusting Jesus. And so when we got to North Carolina, things weren't working quite as we had hoped, especially our living situation. So I was praying to God, sometimes extremely frustrated in God, but still kept up the open communication with him. And just always taking that next step, praying that he had ordained that next step. My friend that I went on this hike with, she knew of our living situation and how we were struggling, so she invited us over for dinner. And when they invited us over for dinner, she said, I want you to live with us. I want your family to live with us. I had never met her, but I was at total peace. God had ordained this, and I knew it, and she said she felt called. They took our family in. Our kids had a blast living with them, and I had never experienced such generosity like that. For the past 8.5 years, I have been studying at the Theology of the Body Institute, and at a course I was attending, my teacher, Christopher West, shared a quote by Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, that greatly spoke to me at this time. He said, man was created for greatness, for God himself. He was created to be filled by God, but his heart is too small for greatness, to which it is destined. It must be stretched. This requires hard work and is painful, but in this way alone do we become suited to that for which we are destined. The stretching was painful, but it was done one step at a time. And God has been so good to me. My heart has now, through these painful steps, has now been expanded to include more and more people through family, marriage, children, friends, these moves. More people are there, allowing me to contain more of God. Lesson number 3, find the beauty in the journey. Throughout the entire hike, especially when times are difficult, we struggle to find the beauty. It had to be intentional, because everything in our bodies at this time said, this is awful. What have we done? This is awful. And so it just all seemed bad. But I have also found that hope is what leads to beauty. And so the hope of that next peak and the beauty that it revealed kept me going. And not only that, but challenged me to find the beauty that was right there in my nearby surroundings. The leaves, the trees, the shade. So in my life, I've been married for 14 years now and have 5 kids here on earth. And this day, 14 years ago, that happened. And so Pope Benedict, on this day, he gave us this quote. He blessed our marriage, and he gave us this quote. May you, dear newlyweds, be witnesses to the love of Christ who has called you to achieve a common project of life. Some days in this 14 years, I'm doing an okay job of reflecting God's love. Okay. Some days, I'm not. I will admit it, I'm not. And as you know, a lot of the days we feel like are mostly spent in the valleys. Rarely are we up on those peaks. There was one day about 2 years ago where the struggles of life were very apparent. All I could see were the toys, the laundry, the dishes, and I just felt like I have failed. And that's all I could hear in my head. I have failed. I am an awful wife. I'm an awful mom. That's all I could hear in my head. It was not coming from my kids. It was not coming from my husband. It was just all here. And so I was starting to believe in those lies. And so I was not loving those most precious to me. And then my phone rang. One of my son's teachers, a great Dominican sister, she had called to talk to me about my son, who was going through a little bit of some bullying issues and how we could best tend to him. And she's just this beautiful, sweet, soft-spoken, calm sister. And it was really beautiful. But then all of a sudden, she could tell I was struggling. I don't know how, but she could tell I was struggling. She could tell that I was kind of being bullied by the devil, and that I was being worn down. And this sister's tone changed. That woman went in all-out fighting mode for me. And she said, "You are a good wife." I hadn't told her that I was thinking these things, but she said, "You are a good wife. You are a good mom. You are an inspiration to me and the other sisters." She reminded me of the beauty that was surrounding me in my vocation when I felt like I was in the valley. And she reminded me of the beauty within. After that phone call, I had a renewed sense of hope, and I could go back to my family, a transformed woman. One of the best spiritual advices that I just kind of want to share with you at this time was given to me by a priest, and he said, if you ever hear the words "you are," and it is something good, treasure that. Write it down. Hold tight. Because you're created in the image and likeness of God. And so you are good. so your identity will always be good. If you hear things like you are and it's not good, dismiss it. Just dismiss it. And so in that moment, I recognized the Holy Spirit through that sister just overloaded me with positive you are comments. After I got off the phone, I wrote them all down so that way if I found myself in the valley again, I could open up my journal and I could see all those you are comments and know that that was God speaking to me. Lesson number 4, you were made for communion. So back on the hike, at peak 4, mile marker 8, we're done. We're done. We're not going to do this 10 miles. And we knew on the way to peak 5, the parking lot was going to be there before we made it to peak 5. So we thought we could cheat and just leave. But then God put this powerhouse of a woman in front of us. It's that woman right there in the middle with the sign on her chest. She started, we don't know who she was. She just appeared. And she was standing on a boulder in front of us. And she just starts telling us, like, I was in the army and I was the only female and I was doing, unbelievable obstacles. And she was like, and I praise God, he's so good. And I'm like, I was just about to give up on this hike. And so my friend and I looked at each other, we said, we're doing this, and we're sticking with this woman right here. And we did. She became one of our best friends. I also asked the Blessed Mother, oh, Blessed Mother, please let water appear. I don't know how I'm going to make it up this next one. Make the water appear, and we were coming down off of peak 4, and there was a random four-wheeler with a massive jug of water in the back of it, just by itself. And I was like, is that for us? Is that for us? So I was like, oh, thank you, Blessed Mother. So with our community of women, we did this. Pope St. John Paul II tells us in his Theology of the Body, his most beautiful writings on the beauty of the human person, body and soul, and how we relate to God. He reminds us that man is made in the image and likeness of God. And he says the one thing that is not good is for man to be alone. And so he makes the helper. We have Eve. And she is his helper to get to heaven. And I would say, yes, this is the model for all marriages. But I would also say this is the model for friendships. God gives us helpers along the way. Parents, siblings, family, a spouse, friends, mentors, saints, all of the above. And he entrusts them to our care, but we are to exist for them too. That's what Pope John Paul II says. We exist for the other. And recently I learned that vulnerability leads to true communion. That's a tough word, right? And I have found this to be true as I reflect on my relationships in life. The more vulnerable and open I am to God in prayer, the more intimate our relationship is. At the most vulnerable times, our youth, God provided a great family who instilled the beauty of his faith in me. In marriage, I must be vulnerable with my spouse, revealing my true self, my strengths and my weaknesses and my wounds, and let him tend to me. When my husband was converting to the faith, I was a cradle Catholic. I had to be very vulnerable in front of him and admit, I don't know any of the answers to any of the questions you're asking right now. And when I was vulnerable like that, and that took a while for me to accept that. I had some issues with pride there. But when I did, God sent me so many beautiful teachers and mentors to help me know his beautiful truth. I was vulnerable when I moved, having to open myself up to new adventures and new relationships, and I had one friend who told me she loved me. The very first day we met, she said, I love you. And she's like, I know that's weird, I just said the L word to you. That is so weird. But it was awesome. It was exactly what I needed. God was telling me that I was loved and reminded me. I had another friend when I first met her asked to pray over me. I told of my other friends, my little 5-month-old is here, and last year I was pregnant, so I was very scared, very nervous about that. And I opened myself up to many women about that, and I had so many prayer warriors and support who provided so much peace for me. I opened myself up and I'm vulnerable around other women just about marriage and family and how tough it can be. And they're just like, oh yeah, I did that too. Yeah, it's okay, girl. It's all right. And that has provided so much healing. Now I would say God works in miraculous ways when we open ourselves up to Him and His people, but we do have to protect ourselves. So make sure you open yourself up to people who you know you can trust, people who are striving for holiness. St. John Paul II said again, "You are unique and unrepeatable, someone chosen by eternal love." So a true friend is to remind you of your beauty, your dignity, your uniqueness, and help you to be who God created you to be, helping you to be in His image and likeness, not theirs. So build your vocation on love and make it a community of love, and find some other friends who will support that community, who will foster that community of love for you to lean in. And with this community, you will climb great heights. In the end, my friend and I completed this hike 8 hours and 22 minutes. But as I stood at the last peak, I could see the first peak. It was unbelievable what we had done. I stood there in wonder and amazement that we had traveled the distance. It was difficult, inspiring, an act of faith, and totally worth every moment of it. Most of our days are spent in those valleys or ascending a tough peak or descending one, and the devil is trying to discourage us because we are life bearers. But don't despair. The Lord will provide, especially through His sacraments, if you take one step at a time, you treasure the beauty around you, and you surround yourself with that community, striving for holiness. And you will radiate God's love in this world and reveal Him in a way that no one else can. So be radiant, be who you are, a daughter of God who has been entrusted to take care of His people, and you will accomplish great things with God's grace. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Thank you.